Mabuhay everyone! Welcome to this episode in Chapter 31. My name is Sir Ron, your teacher reporter in Advanced Educational Psychology 2. Today, join me as we develop your knowledge in the concept and structure of personality, specifically about the Freud's structure of personality. But before we proceed, let's have a short prayer.
Lord, thank you for this day, for the presence of everyone in this call. For once again, we are gathered and given the opportunity to appreciate life and your words. Forgive us for our shortcomings and cleanse our hearts as we learn and live your words and example. Father, bless our endeavors, especially today's meeting. May you guide us in our discussions, and may you enlighten our minds in every decision that we make. Give us your grace that we may effectively do our parts for your greater glory. All this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Again, good day everyone! Usually, kapag tinatry natin i-explain ang personality ng isang tao, ang ginagawa natin yung point of reference, yung nakaraan ng taong ito. Especially, yung kanyang childhood. For example, during his childhood, he experienced trauma. Well, kapag ganyan yung perspective ng pag-explain ng personality ng isang tao, ito ay nagmula sa konsepto ng psychoanalysis. So, ayon sa psychoanalysis, ang mga past experiences natin ay may malaking influence sa mga present behaviors natin. Pero just that the basic of psychoanalysis. Ano nga ba ang psychoanalysis? At sino tong si Sigmund Freud na nagpauso ng psychoanalysis? So, ito yung pag-uusapan natin sa episode na ito. But before that, let us define what is personality. What is personality? So, personality has been derived from the Latin word persona, which means must. Personality is the total quality of an individual behavior as it is shown in the habits, thinking, attitudes, interests, the manner of acting, and the personal philosophy of life. It includes the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor behaviors and covers all the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious also. So personality, it is specific and unique for each and every individual. Personality of an individual keeps adjusting itself to the environment on a continuous basis. So, si Sigmund Freud ay isang Austrian neurologist na nagtalaga ng kanyang sariling way o sariling clinical method sa paggamot ng psychopathology. So, ang psychopathology, ito yung mga symptoms that are psychological in nature. In the decade from 1887 to 1897, Freud immersed himself in the serious study of disturbances in his hysterical patients, resulting in discoveries that contributed to the beginnings of psychoanalysis. In early researches were in collaboration with Joseph Breuer and then from his own independent investigations. Knowing Freud's interest in hysterical pathology, Breuer told him about the unusual case of a woman, a case of Anna O. He had treated for approximately 1.5 years. So during these periods, he favored hypnosis early in his career, but he moved gradually toward pre-association. So instead of constration method in which urging, pressing, questioning, and trying to defeat patient's resistance actually interfere with the free flow of thoughts, he replaced it with pre-association, which forms basic rule of psychoanalysis. Applying such techniques to a steady stream of patients, Freud pieced together a picture of personality that shaped much of the field of psychology. Who is Sigmund Freud? So, Sigmund Freud was the father of psychoanalysis, a method used to explain human behavior and treat mental illness. So, according to Freud, he believed that life was built around tension and pleasure. He felt that all tension was due to the build-up of libido, or a sexual energy, and the all pleasure came from its discharge. So according to Freud, the unconscious mind was a storehouse of unacceptable repressed desire, specific to the individual, and that past experiences, particularly in childhood, have a great influence on our adult lives, shaping our personality. For instance, ancient tea originating from traumatic experiences in a person's past is hidden from consciousness and may cause problems during adulthood in the form of neuroses such as melancholia, hysteria, obsessive or compulsive behaviors. This is the structure of the mind, the iceberg analogy. Freud believed that human psyche was composed of three elements. The conscious mind contains ideas, thoughts, and feelings of which we are aware and make up 10% of our psyche. The 50 to 60% of the psyche is the sub or free conscious mind, which contains materials that can easily be recalled, such as what we did last weekend. The remaining 30 to 40% of the psyche is the unconscious mind, which is well below to the surface of the awareness. It contains repressed memories, traumatic experiences, unacceptable urges, and all of our primitive instincts and desires. The structure of personality. According to Freud, there are three basic structures of personality: the id, the ego, and then the superego. These three elements work together to create complex behaviors and have a powerful influence on individuals. Each of these three elements of personality emerge at different points in life, although each part of the personality comprises unique features. They interact, form a whole, and each part makes relative to the contribution to an individual's behavior. So, si Freud organized the structure or model of personality with three unlocking or interlocking parts: the id, ego, and superego. When we say id, it contains all our biologically based drives. It operates according to our pleasure principle. Id-driven behaviors are impulsive and may be irrational. The ego functions on the basis of reality principle. It contains or it maintains harmony between the external world, the id, and the ego. The superego, referred as the perfection principle or the morality. The superego is important in the socialization of the individual at this assists the ego in control the id impulses. The id is the only component of personality present birth, and it is entirely unconscious. Freud called a culture of seeking excitement that is the irrational component of personality that seeks immediate satisfaction of instinctual urges and desires, regardless the consequences, and it's ruled by the pleasure principle. It is the primitive and instinctive part of the mind that consists of all the inherited or biological components of personality, including, let's say, sexual or aggressive drives, If the needs of the id are not satisfied immediately, a state of anxiety or attention results. The id is impulsive and responds immediately to the instincts. The personality of a newborn child is all id, and only later does it develop an ego and superego. Imagine trying to convince a baby to wait until lunchtime to eat its meal instead. It requires immediate satisfaction, and because the other components of personality are not yet present, the infant will surely cry until these needs are fulfilled. Although people eventually learn to control it via ego, the id remains infantile in its function throughout a person's life and does not change with time or experiences and is not in touch with the external world. The id is not affected by reality logic, our everyday world. It is operates within the unconscious part of the mind. Freud said that ego is the part of the egg which has been modified by the direct influence of the external world. It develops to immediate between the unrealistic id and the external real world. Hence, it operates according to the reality principle. It is the partly conscious rational decision-making component of personality that regulates thoughts and behavior. Ideally, the ego works by reason, whereas the id is chaotic and unreasonable. The ego considers social realities and norms, etiquette, and roles in deciding how to behave. It works our realistic ways of satisfying the demands in a manner acceptable in the real world. In many cases, the impulses can be satisfied through a process of delayed gratification. The ego will eventually allow the behavior, but only in the appropriate time and place. Then Freud made the analogy of the id being a horse while the ego is the rider. The ego is like a man on horseback who has to hold in check the super strength of the horse. For example, imagine that you are stuck in a long meeting work. Find yourself growing increasingly hungry as the meeting drags on while it might compel compel you to jump up from your seat and rush to break room for a snack. The ego guides you to sit quietly and wait for the meeting to end. Instead of acting upon the primal urges of the id, you spend the rest of the meeting imagining yourself eating a cheeseburger. Once the meeting is finally over, you can seek out the object you were imagining to satisfy the demands of the unrealistic or the realistic and appropriate manner. The last component of personality to develop is the superego, which emerged at age 5. It is partly conscious, self-evaluative, and moralistic component of personality that is formed through the internalization of parental and societal rules. The superego provides guidelines for making judgments and focuses on how we ought to behave. Superego acts to perfect and civilize our behavior, working to surface all unacceptable urges of the ego. It struggles to make the ego act upon idealistic standards rather upon realistic principles. The superego consists of two systems. The first one is the conscience, and the other is the ideal self. The conscience can punish the ego through causing feelings of guilt. For example, if the ego gives in the its demands, the superego may the person feel bad through guilt. The ideal self or ego ideal is imaginary picture of how you ought to be and represent real aspirations, how to treat other people, and how to behave as a member of society. So this is the interactions between the id, the ego, and superego. When we're talking about the id, the ego, and the superego, it is important to remember that these are not three totally separate entities with clearly defined boundaries. Ano pa? So these aspects of personality, ids are dynamic and always interacting within a person to influence an individual's overall personality and behavior. If the ego is able adequately moderate between the demands of the id and the superego, a healthy and well-adjusted personality. So Freud believed that an imbalance with these elements would lead to a maladaptive personality. An individual with an overly dominant id, for example, might become impulsive, uncontrollable, or even criminal. This individual acts upon his or her most basic urges with no concern for whether the behavior is appropriate, acceptable, or illegal. And or overly dominant superego, on the other hand, might lead to a personality that is extremely moralistic and possibly judgmental. This person may be a very unable to accept anything or anyone that he or she perceive as bad or immoral, and excessively dominance at ego can also result in problems. So an individual with this type of personality might be so tied to reality rules and appropriateness that they are unable to engage in any type of spontaneous or unexpected behavior. This individual may seem very concrete or rigid and incapable of accepting changes and lacking an internal sense of right from wrong. It is easy to see how conflict might arise between the id, ego, and superego. When the ego is unable to deal with the demands of constraints of reality and the moral standards of the superego, an unpleasant inner state of anxiety arises. This anxiety acts as a signal to the ego that things are not going to the way they should. As a result, the ego employs defense mechanisms to help reduce these feelings of anxiety. Conflict arises from within our own mind, while anxiety from realistic sources in the outside world. Conflict happens when the id has some desires which ego and or superego do not agree with, and the ego works as defense mechanisms. We deal with anxiety through physical or psychological defense. So, according to Freud, anxiety is an unpleasant inner state that people seek to avoid. Anxiety acts as a signal to the ego that things are not going right. Only the ego can feel the anxiety. So, gagawin ni ego para ma-resolba ang anxiety na ito. Kapag hindi nakahanap ng paraan si ego para resolbahin ito, sobrang mahihirapan si ego. Kapag nahirapan na si ego, gagamit na siya ng mga defensive behaviors or tinatawag nating defense mechanism para mabawasan ang unpleasant feeling na ito. When anxiety occurs, the mind's first response is to seek rational ways of escaping the situation by increasing problem-solving efforts, and a range of defense mechanisms may be triggered. There are ways that the ego develops to deal with the id and superego. In order to deal with this anxiety, Freud believed that defense mechanisms help shield the ego from the conflicts created by the id, superego, and reality. Ego defense mechanism or defense mechanism. Defense mechanisms often appear unconsciously and tend to distort or falsify reality. When the distortion of reality occurs, there is a change in perception which allows for a lessening in anxiety, resulting in a reduction of tension one experiences. Sigmund Freud noted a number of ego defense that were noted throughout his work, but his daughter, Anna Freud, developed and elaborated on them. So, ayon kay Freud, lahat ng tao gumagamit ng defense mechanism, lalo kapag natitreaten na si ego sa paligid natin. Why do we need defenses? Defense mechanisms are invented by the ego in an attempt to resolve the conflict between id and superego, so that personality can operate in a healthy manner. Unwanted memories vanish, the unconscious do not disappear. They continue to exert a powerful influence on behavior. Defense mechanisms help keep urge, thoughts, and memories that cause anxiety in the unconscious. And if it's used once in a while, the purpose of using it is to reduce stress. But it is used too frequently. It means the individual are trying to avoid facing reality. Freud suggested that the ego reacts to the threatened breakthrough of id impulses in either of two ways. One, by blocking the impulse from expression in conscious behavior. Two, by distorting it to such a degree that the original intensity is markedly reduced or deflected. All defense mechanisms share two common characteristics. They operate at an unconscious level and are therefore self-defective or self-deceptive, and they distort, deny, or falsify perception of reality as to make anxiety less threatening to the individual. Let's summarize some of the defense making sense the ego may employ to alleviate. Ancient repression acts to keep information out of the conscious awareness. However, these memories don't just disappear, they continue to influence our behavior. For example, a person who has repressed memories of abuse suffered as a child may later have difficulty for forming relationships. Denial was probably one of the best-known defense mechanisms. It is outright refusal to admit or recognize that something has occurred or is currently occurring. In many cases, there might be overwhelming evidence that something is true, yet the person will continue to deny its existence or truth because it is too uncomfortable to face. Denial can involve a flat-out rejection of the existence as a fact or reality. In other cases, it might involve admitting that something is true, but minimizing its importance. Sometimes people will accept reality and the seriousness of the fact, but they will deny their own responsibility and instead blame other people or other forces. Drug addicts or alcoholics often deny that they have a problem, while victims of traumatic events may deny that the event may occur. Projection is a defense mechanism that involves taking our own acceptable qualities or feelings and ascribing them to other people. For example, if you have a strong dislike for someone, you might instead believe that he or she does not like you. Projection works by allowing the expression of the desire or impulse, but in a way that the ego cannot recognize, therefore reducing anxiety. Rationalization is the defense mechanism that involves explaining an acceptable behavior or feeling in a rational or logical manner, avoiding the true reasons for the behavior. For example, a person who has turned down for a date might rationalize the situation by saying they were not attracted to other person. Anyway, a student might blame a poor exam score on the instructor rather than his or lack of preparation. Rationalization prevents anxiety. It may also protect self-esteem and self-concept. When confronted by success or failure, people tend to attribute achievement to their own qualities and skills, while failures are blamed on other people or outside forces. Another defense mechanism is displacement. Displacement involves taking out our frustration feelings and impulses on people or objects that are less threatening displays. Aggregation is a common example of this defense mechanism. Others express our anger in ways that could lead to negative consequences like arguing with our boss. We instead express our anger towards a person or objects that poses no threats such as spouse, children, pets. Reaction formation reduces anxiety by taking up the opposite feeling, impulse, or behavior. An example of reaction formation would be treating someone you strongly dislike in an excessively friendly manner in order to hide your true feelings when confronted by stressful events. People sometimes abandon coping strategies and revert to patterns of behavior used in earlier development. This defense mechanism is called regression. For example, an individual fixated at an earlier development stage might cry or shock upon hearing unpleasant news. Finally, we have sublimation. Sublimation is a defense mechanism that allows us to act unacceptable impulses by converting uh, the behaviors into a more acceptable form. For example, a person experiencing extreme anger might take up kickboxing as a means of venting frustration. So Freud believed that sublimation was a sign of maturity that allows people to function normally in socially acceptable ways. Thank you very much for watching. See you.